This is part three of this dialogue with the Trinity that I wrote really to try to distinguish two different versions of the story of God's plan of salvation. One version, the part I did, part two, is the penal substitutionary atonement, typical story that a lot of people have grown up with, but have never quite said it as brutally uh, and starkly offensively as I just did in that video. And I'm sorry if it hurt anyone. Certainly not my intention, but I'm trying to clarify just how bad that version of the story is. I prefer the first version of the story, which is more Trinitarian and um, takes into account the character of God that's being portrayed in the scripture. It doesn't set God up to be worse than us. And I really think that the answer to all of this, and in the last, I don't know, dozen years or so, what God has really been showing me is that the truth of the incarnation, that God became human and came to live among us, that God experienced all of what it is to be human, that God joined us in our humanity so that we could join him in his divinity. Like the ancient version of the Christian faith, that story is the truer one, the truer interpretation of the facts of what we have in the scripture and in what has happened. I wrote this little poem called Forget Atonement, Find Incarnation. Not because we actually need to forget atonement. The atonement is important, but I think how we interpret the atonement of what Jesus did on the cross makes more sense in light of the incarnation, that God came to live among us and experience all of what we experience. Here's how this one goes. Forget atonement, find incarnation. In this move was our salvation. An abstract thought can never save a living man from a dirty grave. Only a God become a man could bleed enough to understand the pain we bear, the shame we hide, from guilt we bury deep inside. God with us, not instead of us. God as us, not over us. I'm just going to repeat those last couple lines because I think this is a key to really understanding what God did. God with us, not God instead of us. God as us, not over us. If you want to talk more about this, tomorrow I'm going to be going live on a live stream at 10 a.m. Central Time, 8 a.m. Pacific, and we can interact there. Join me and jump in on the chat, and we can kind of go and interact, and I can answer questions, and we can talk about all this. So, hey, keep following along. Appreciate you joining me.